We'll tell you which running back filling in for an injured starter should be in your DFS lineups, and we'll tell you about an exclusive listener league later in the show. This is the Football Guys Daily Fantasy Power Grid presented by DraftKings. We're about to get you ready for the Week 2 main slates. But to do that, we're going to kick it over to John first to talk about Vegas, which should give us a little bit of a preview and a tease of some of the games these players are going to come from. What do you got, John?
Got some big favorites coming off of week 1. We have 3 double-digit favorites, which is kind of a rarity in the NFL. That list starts off with the New England Patriots, almost 20-point favorites, 18.5-point favorites over a Miami Dolphins team that was throttled last week by Baltimore. Team total on the Patriots is 33.5. There should be a lot of fantasy goodness to go around. We're going to have to talk about how that gets broken up when we get to the running backs and wide receivers section of the show. Elsewhere, you've got Baltimore, 2-touchdown favorite coming off of that big game against Miami. They're at home going against Arizona. I'll tell you a little bit about why I like that game and why I might be targeting it. And then the Houston Texans are at home against Jacksonville as 10-point favorites as well. So we got some big favorites. We have on the Vegas value chart this week, we have 5 3-star teams in terms of passing rushing matchups. And 2 of them are actually away favorites, those being New England, we just talked about, as well as Kansas City. They're the second highest team total on the slate at 30.3 points. They're going against Oakland in California. So maybe some fool's gold there, although I think we can all agree maybe not. And then we'll talk about some game stacks as well. There's some 50-point totals or more. The Rams in New Orleans is a game that looks really attractive, as well as some others that I guess we'll talk about as the show goes on.
And speaking of really attractive, you should try out our lineup optimizer, which is a very attractive way to build your lineups. It's new for 2019. Go check that out over at footballguys.com. You can look at past weeks and test it with past weeks, even if you're not a subscriber, just to get a feel for what it can do. So let's talk quarterbacks, guys. Ryan, I'll pitch it to you first. The only injury that kind of shows up on my list is that Nick Foles is on IR. I don't know that matters a ton for DFS. What do you got for quarterbacks this week?
Yeah, I feel like we can talk about quarterbacks for quite some time tonight. I don't recall a week this flush with legitimate choices. And I won't steal Devin's QB strategy that he was talking about before the show. I'll let him talk about that here in a minute. So I may leave a very notable quarterback out, but you know, I think this week, like I said, there's so many at so many different prices. You obviously have Lamar Jackson coming off of his huge week. There's a lot of talk of will he be able to pass this well each week. I think in closer games you're going to see the passing come down, but you're going to see the rushing go up. So I think Jackson's still a good play this week as a huge home favorite. Just if you really want to go a little cheaper and load up on the studs everywhere else, there's a lot of good mid-range or low-priced quarterbacks with good matchups this week. Among them, my favorite is Josh Allen, who is playing at the Giants. And the Giants were horrible last week, and I think last year they were pretty bad against the pass too. Maybe not statistically, but they also had game script in their favor that didn't allow them didn't allow their opponents to rack up a lot of passing yards.
They allowed the second most passing yards per game last year, and they got worse because they went from Landon Collins to Jabril Peppers at safety.
So that's important too, because that's yardage. And the numbers I was looking at earlier this week was they were 9th fewest, I think, in fantasy points. But as we know, yards are more predictive than touchdowns. So that's another great stat there for Devin and supports Josh Allen. And Josh Allen's good enough to get you fantasy points, but probably not good enough to blow out the Giants on the road. So I think the blowout risk and Buffalo slowing it down is pretty low with him too. Another guy down there that I like is Derek Carr this week. So, he was very efficient last week against a Denver defense that's frankly so much better than Kansas City. And the volume is going to be much higher. And I think the efficiency will stay because of that Kansas City defense compared to Denver. And then I'll let the other guys do the rest.
So John is traveling. He's on the road. So he doesn't have his sort of like Black Eyed Joe sign with, red disagree, yellow agree. So he's using a digital version to agree there with one of Ryan's picks. All right, Devin, tell us about your QBs.
So I mentioned it last week, but it's start Patrick Mahomes in cash every single week of the year until they price him at a significantly much higher rate than what they do. So I think he's 7,500 on DraftKings, which is, you can easily find the dollars to get there. And he's going up against an Oakland defense that is without Garyon Conley, who's probably their best corner. And really, I mean, Kansas City should be able to basically do whatever they want against Oakland, whether it's through the air or on the ground. Another guy that I do like Lamar Jackson. I do like Josh Allen. I'm going with Matt Ryan on a bounce back. So the Eagles secondary, I think a lot of us had anticipated that they were going to be much improved, but they gave up 380 yards and 3 touchdowns to Case Keenum last week. So it's a situation in which Matt Ryan is probably going to be lower owned than what he should be, simply because people are going to be scared off of the performance last week, but there's still a lot of talent there and there's still a lot of weapons. And the last guy I'll save for John, just because I know he loves him. And I'll jump back in if some miracle happens and he doesn't mention him.
And, for the most part, we cover the main slates, but over there on Fantasy Draft, you've got that Eagles-Falcons game on the main slate over there. So keep that in mind. If you're looking at a guy like Matt Ryan, Fantasy Draft might be a good spot to get him into your lineups. John, tell us about your quarterbacks.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Devin for once. I think it's Patrick Mahomes, and you stop and end there. This guy, I pulled up some of his, as Devin was talking, just looking back to what he's done over the past, call it 10 games. We're looking over the past 10 games, 2 touchdowns, 3, 2, 2, 4, 6, 2, 3, 4, 4, 4. And he's 7,500. The guy is just matchup proof. That's not even talking about the bonuses over 300 yards. And, you look at a guy like that and then talk about cash, who's more reliable. I get you get the discount with Josh Allen. I'm going to go on record and say I don't think he's a good cash game play, even though our projections are showing him as a good cash game play. I just don't think he's a good quarterback. And even, last week, I think he turned the ball over 4 times. I recognize it's a good matchup. I recognize the price is low, but I think that this is a week where you can afford to go with a guy like Mahomes. And if you don't like him, what about Big Ben guys? Ben Roethlisberger, bounce back week. I think he's a bit too cheap at 5,800 on DraftKings. I'm going to give you some fantasy draft prices this week as well, because I'm going to start playing some more over there with the lack of rake. He's only 10,400 over there. And, we're going to talk a little bit about the Austin, your evaluator tool.
Yeah.
I mean, it compares prices between sites and shows you where the value is. Big Ben's pretty darn cheap over there at Fantasy Draft, and I like him in cash games over there. Those are the 2 guys I'm looking at in cash. I don't think you need to go any further than them. So I'm interested to hear who Devin thinks I was going to be on for cash games.
Dak Prescott.
No,
so with Fabian Moreau's out, they cut Greg Stroman. Jimmy Moreland as a 7th round pick is sliding into their number 2 corner. Josh Norman is a shell of what he once was. Maybe it's not a cash game play, but I think Dak is strongly in consideration this week. For me, there's only one cash game play. I don't understand. Like, it's start Mahomes and move on. So everything that I've said outside of Mahomes is a GPP play for me.
Yeah. Well, maybe it's Michael Gallup then is the answer with all the second corner problems there in Washington.
And then we haven't mentioned Tom Brady. So going up against Miami is going to be incredibly popular. I'm not doing it in cash, and I'll get to the running back section a little bit later, but there's a running back who is, if he's active, I'm not even taking Brady in GPPs. So, but Brady, what are they? It's projected to score, John, 33, you said?
33.5.
So that's 4 touchdown upside, and I think that we've seen they have the ability to go over that if Miami's offense can do something. But my concern is that the Patriots defense might be the best in the league. So we'll see. But I'm not doing it in cash, and depending on an active or inactive, I might do it in GPPs.
And just a note for John mentioned the evaluator tool. It doesn't really necessarily tell you who to play, but if you've got a guy in mind that you like this week, it'll tell you which site he's the best to play on, where the sort of the pricing inefficiencies are on a particular site. So check that out over at footballguys.com. One guy we haven't mentioned that seems fairly high on projection value ownership stuff that I'm looking at in our lineup optimizer is Deshaun Watson. Is Deshaun Watson, I don't know, he's probably not a cash game play, but is he a GPP play for you guys?
He's certainly in GPP contention, but the thing that scares me away from him is probably, in line with the argument that Devin just made about Tom Brady, is whether or not the Jacksonville Jaguars are going to be able to keep points on the board to keep that game competitive with what the heck's his name?
Gardner Minshew.
Gardner Minshew. With him,
he went to East Carolina. You should know this.
I actually did know that, but it was
he transferred to Washington State, so the comment section don't blow me up. But
John has forgotten much more common names than that one.
Yes, he has. Yes, he has. I will stand behind that comment. But that's the concern with him. Certainly, they can put up a bucket load of points. The question is whether or not they'll need to. They've actually got, for the first time in years, a little bit of running depth there in Houston, and so maybe they just hand the ball off to a combination of Duke Johnson and Carlos Hyde when they build out a lead. That's not to say that I won't have some of him in mass multi-entry, but I think you can probably get away from him just a bit because of the lack of offense from Jacksonville, who's only slated to score 17 points per Vegas.
So one quick thing about Gardner Minshew, just because.
Bless you.
His dad actually isn't – he's named Gardner Minshew the second, but his dad isn't Gardner Minshew the first. So his dad actually named him Gardner Minshew the second. And his his grandfather wanted to name him Beowulf.
Beowulf, yeah. That was
Beowulf.
That's right. And they may have gone with the fourth if that had passed.
Very interesting guy. I hope him all the best, but I can't take him this week.
No, not this week.
Yeah,
so
probably.
Just because I said him does not mean I'm recommending him.
All the comments are going to blow up now. Why is he recommending the Gardner Minshew? Devin's at it again. Speaking of which, please comment down below on which guys you agree with and which ones you don't. I'm pretty sure most of them will be yelling at Devin, so thanks for that.
Wouldn't be the first time.
Exactly.
So, a couple GPP plays from my list. I think at the top of my list this week, Kyler Murray. The amount of plays that they're running last week, the seconds per play in terms of pace, 21 seconds per play last week, because they were trailing for most of that game. They end up taking it into overtime. Murray, he didn't look good. He hasn't looked good all spring or all fall, I guess. But he's going to get a lot of action for a fairly cheap price, $5,400 on DraftKings, $10,200 over at Fantasy Draft. I just like him from a volume perspective. I think he can put up decent numbers, and I think you can do a complete stack there. If you want to go like Mark Engram because you think that the Ravens are going to blow them out. The Ravens, by the way, have some problems in their secondary. They got some injured folks. I think there's a lot to exploit there. And you could go Mark Engram running the ball in a game script that favors them, according to Vegas, and then run that back with a complete team stack on Arizona on the cheap with Kyler Murray. You could get David Johnson, who ran, I think, 15 routes as a wide receiver last week. And you could get one of your favorite receivers, whether it be Larry Fitz or Christian Kirk, who looked pretty good as well. So love that game stack. Love Kyler as a GPP quarterback. And the other two guys that are on my GPP list right now, Derek Carr opposite Patrick Mahomes in a game where they look like they'll be trailing for most of it. And then Jared Goff in a shootout potential with Drew Brees there in Los Angeles. I think all of those guys are fairly priced, and they certainly bring some upside to the table.
Devin didn't like the Kyler Murray pick. Ryan did. Any last thoughts on that, Devin?
I just think it's an offensive line mismatch, and he's going to be in a lot of trouble from a blitzing standpoint. He's going to see things that he hasn't seen from Harbaugh and the Ravens. So I think that it's a game where if the offensive line could hold up, sure, but because they do have Jimmy Smith who's out, but I really worry that he's going to take a lot of beating this week.
Yeah, and they did just put their right tackle Marcus Gilbert on IR too. Arizona did, so could be an issue.
All right. Let's move on to running backs, guys. Got 3 guys we're looking at here, and I want to get your take on some of these. Darius Geis is out with a knee injury. Tevin Coleman is out with an ankle injury. And Joe Mixon didn't practice on Thursday. We'll see what comes of that. Let's go to John first to talk about running backs. What do you think, man?
I think there are 2 running backs this week that you almost plug and play into cash games. Austin Eckler, who looked fantastic last week. They've got some issues with Hunter Henry going out, so those some overflow targets that are going to go elsewhere. And Eckler looked the part last week, running between the tackles, catching the ball, doing everything that he was asked to do with the team. And I suspect he's going to continue to get some massive volume there. And I love him on DraftKings, 6,100, full PPR. I think he's got a lot of upside, and I wouldn't be surprised to see him get a total of 20 touches in this game. Chris Carson is the other one, 6,400, 11,200 over there at Fantasy Draft. I think that's, this team, Chris Carson looked great last week, by the way, as well. He led the team in targets and receiving in terms of, Russ Wilson looking for him in the open. They are a short underdog. They're in Pittsburgh at 4-point underdog, but I think that, he's another guy that's going to continue to see a lot of action, and he's underpriced at 6,400. So when I'm looking at building my cash games, I want folks that are going to be steady volume and provide some value on that investment. And I think those are the 2 that stand at the top of my list. I have a couple others, but I'll stop there.
Devin, tell me about your running backs.
Yeah, I think Alvin Kamara is my top guy this week. We saw what Christian McCaffrey did to this Rams defense last week. They're more built to – their linebacking core has been an issue the past couple of years, and they have some top end corners. Their defensive line is very good, but this is a game in which Kamara should see – and his price isn't too prohibitive, so he's only 8,200 on FanDuel, and what is he on DraftKings? He's 8,200 on DraftKings as well. But I think that he's in a position where the Saints may struggle a little bit throwing the ball against his secondary, and Kamara could have a McCaffrey type game where if you don't have him in cash, you may lose. I'm fading Saquon Barkley, which is incredibly dangerous. His price is too high and he only had 11 carries last week, which was sort of strange. And the game was close for much of the first half, and I think he only had 6 carries. So the volume, for whatever reason, isn't there, and that scares me. And then the one running back that I teased a little bit is, and I'm not recommending him, let me get that clear, is Damian Harris. So Damian Harris to me is a key to this slate in the sense that if he's active, it sort of tells you what the Patriots are going to plan to do, which is run the ball down Miami's throat. They have some offensive line issues that they're working through. They could just use this game as a get the offensive line right game. I think it's David Andrews, their center, is out, and then they just lost someone else as well. But it's a game where if they start 4 running backs, or if they dress 4 running backs, then I'm concerned about New England.
In terms of trying to get that high-powered passing game that you might think Brady would provide. Yeah,
exactly. And Rex Burkhead, who I know is going to be popular. If Harris is active, it takes away some of his late blowout potential. So
right.
Harris and Burkhead both will probably see the ball late if that's the case. So just think about that as you're building lineups.
Yeah, and fading Barkley could be dicey with Sterling Shepard maybe not playing in this game with a concussion. He didn't practice on Thursday. Maybe that's more action in the passing game for Barkley, or maybe the whole offense implodes. Ryan, tell me about your running backs.
Yeah, I'm interested in watching the Joe Mixon injury status here because Gio Bernard strikes me as a player I would play in cash if Mixon is out. There have been 4 games in the last 2 years Mixon has missed, and Bernard has averaged over 19 PPR points in those games. He is not a between the tackles guy, as you might look up the definition of one in the dictionary, but that he is used that way when Mixon is out, often just out of pure necessity because they don't have anybody else, and that's kind of, I think, what the case would be this week. So he's somebody that I'm watching. I'm kind of building mixing in, mixing out lineups at this point. The guys covered the cash game plays I had, though. I mean, Eckler is a slam dunk. It's getting cute to not play him in cash. It's kind of prove it to me that you know what you're doing. If you're playing somebody head to head and you just put Eckler in. Going down the list here, Devin mentioned Burkhead. Steve has him as under 1% projected roster right now. So if Harris doesn't play, I think that's going to be higher, but I don't think it's going to be very high. So Burkhead was on my list as a GPP play. He was clearly the best of the Patriots backs last week. And then last one I have here is James Conner. John alluded to a potential bounce back for the Steelers. I think that is in the making. They're going home. We know Conner has 4 or 5 catch potential or more as a ceiling. So he's a guy in GPPs that I'm looking at. And again, the Eckler Kamara was a nice nucleus in cash.
John, with Tevin Coleman out, is Matt Breida on your radar? Probably not for cash, but I guess he's a GPP consideration here.
Oh, he's definitely for GPP. He's a talented back, and I think that this is actually a good opportunity for him. I know a lot of some very prominent people in the DFS fantasy football community were touting Matt Breida as a real option, the best back in San Francisco. And now he's going to have a chance to prove it over the next few weeks. So, we'll see what he brings to the table. He's got a decent matchup against Cincinnati, a team that just last week, Chris Carson, I already talked about, but Chris Carson had a nice game against them. So certainly he should have a lot of opportunity in the way that Jimmy G looked last week and in spring training. I did it again in camp. They could go very heavy with him and make the Bengals try to do something else. So, yeah, he's a guy that I think in GPP should be there. Guys, what about DraftKings only? Adrian Peterson, 3,400, just on volume alone. Why not?
Because he's Adrian Peterson.
I think the Cowboys blow out the Redskins, and I think it's a Chris Thompson game, if anything.
The game script doesn't favor his style, does it?
I would agree with that, but he's been timeless. At some point, Father Time is going to go against him, but
I would say next week, if he struggles this week and people realize that he only had 20, 30 yards, sure. If it's a closer game, I don't know who they play next week, but I want him in a closer game than that.
They're away favorites. Keep that in mind. And no, you don't want him next week. He's playing Chicago.
Yeah, I don't want him next week then.
maybe in week 4 against the Giants.
Did you say they're away favorites?
The Dallas Cowboys are away favorites. That's what I meant to say.
Like potential trap game kind of thing.
Yes,
like away favorites can be a trap, especially early in the season.
Yep.
2 more. So GPP, Ezekiel Elliott, I think, is in a great spot, talking about a potential blowout game. Jonathan Allen for the Redskins is out, who's the best defensive lineman. And Jerron Payne looked like he wasn't really ready to fill in those shoes for Allen. So they allowed 114 yards or so to the Eagles last week, and we know the Eagles don't have a traditional great running game. So Elliott, I think he's at 5% right now, which is probably the lowest that it'll be in quite some time. And then he should get back to his normal workload after Tony Pollard basically did nothing. And then what are we doing with Josh Jacobs? So Steve has him at like 30+% owned. I can't do it, especially at that ownership. We look at Leonard Fournette last week, and Kansas City's rush defense isn't great. So, but he only carried it 13 times because Kansas City's rush defense is basically their passing offense because they just blow you out. So that's the worry I have in Oakland. If he's that highly owned, I know he's cheap, but I don't know if I can go there.
Yeah, it sounds like both Ryan and John are saying no on him. Yeah, John. I always forget.
It's only been a couple of years, Austin.
Yeah. We've only
he forgets names all the time. So.
Yeah. I was just honoring your tradition.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So, yeah, for our audio-only listeners, it seems like we're all fading Josh Jacobs. You mentioned Leonard Fournette. People blew up in the chat of the YouTube comments last week for us not really talking enough about Leonard Fournette. No.
No.
No, everyone says no.
Well, I hate Leonard. I don't hate him as a person. I hate him as a football player. He just reminds me of this overhyped guy like Trent Richardson, and I go back to the Browns drafting him, trading up to draft Richardson. So,
man, it's that Browns pain speaking through.
PTSD.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
All right. Well, please subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit that bell. And Devin's got a special announcement about a special contest we're going to try to run.
Sure. So as we continue to try and grow this channel, one of the things you guys can do to get notified every time that we're on here is subscribe to the channel. So every time we hit 1,000 subscriber milestone, we're going to do a giveaway contest, which is we're going to select a couple random people, and they're going to play against us and win some cash if they beat all 4 of us. So something fun to give back to the channel. We did one of these last year, and it was a ton of fun. So we're going to do it again this year. We're at 8,750 subscribers right now, and we grew from about 3,800 to 8,700 last year. So I have no doubt we'll quickly hit 9,000. We should hit 10,000 pretty quickly too. So the goal is just to, if you're not subscribed, please subscribe, and it's our way to give back a little bit. So the show that we hit 9,000 on, we will do a giveaway contest where we'll explain all the details. But the key to unlocking it is you guys just hitting that subscribe button on YouTube right below.
Yep. Thanks for subscribing and watching and listening, guys. Let's talk about wide receivers. Ryan, we're going to come to you first. This is where there's a lot of injury intrigue, I would say. We've got Tyreek Hill, who's out. Sterling Shepard, I feel like, is trending kind of doubtful. He didn't practice on Thursday with a concussion. Mike Williams for the Chargers, looks like he may be out. He didn't practice on Thursday. Those are kind of the 3 big guys we're looking at here. And, Mike Williams isn't like super big, but with Hunter Henry out as well, it kind of dings the whole Chargers passing offense and kind of changes the landscape of it a bit. So, Ryan, tell me if any of those guys change your opinions about wide receivers or some other guys you like.
Yeah, one injury that does change my opinion about these receivers is Tyreek Hill, of course, in Kansas City. And I know it's kind of point chasing to take Sammy Watkins right now, but if he were to do half of what he did last week, I think everybody that played him would be pretty happy with it. So he's somebody that I'm looking into. And then in that similar price range, you did mention the Chargers guys. And I just, Keenan Allen just has to be a double-digit target guy this week. I think in any format he's worth playing. Certainly in cash, he's very safe. So Allen is probably, my top guy, at least at or near the top of the price range. Going down to, frankly, the bottom or close to the bottom of the price range, Terry McLaurin, the Devin's boy from Ohio State, the rookie, plays for Washington, of course. He's 3,800 DraftKings, 5,300 FanDuel. He played 93% of the snaps last week in his debut, led the team in air yards. He went 150 yards and a touchdown and was missed on another 70-yard would have been touchdown. Looked really good. Even though a lot of people may not have heard of him, the numbers, even though it's 1 week and a small sample size, they certainly don't lie. So he's somebody I'm looking at as a 3,800 guy and to enable me to get more 7K plus players in the lineup and to play Mahomes in cash, right, Devin?
Yes.
Nice. John, who are your receivers?
So I'll echo the Keenan Allen philosophy. I think that's one of the first things you do this week is just put him in your cash game lineup, set it and forget it. I'm not so sure I can get behind McLaurin as a cash game play. He is on my GPP list. The guy is a speedster. He's a big play guy. I just don't know if I would be willing to do that. It's a 600 discount from Tyrell Williams, who is on my cash game list. I think for $600 more, I'd rather have the more established receiver and an offense that I know is going to be throwing throughout. And, he's coming off of a game where he did demonstrate that he can be the wide receiver 1. So he's a guy that I'm looking to save salary on.
He's the top guy this week.
Yeah. And then in terms of cash, the other 2 guys that are on my list tonight are Michael Thomas, for reasons we really don't have to go into. He's Michael Thomas, and Cooper Kupp in that same game. I like Cooper Kupp coming out of the slot. He'll go up against P.J. Williams, who is the lesser defensive back on that Saints secondary. And I think that he'll get plenty of volume at 6,000 on DraftKings and 11.3 over there at Fantasy Draft.
And John, you mentioned both Allen and Eckler as cash plays. You have no problem putting them both into the same lineup?
No problem at all. They're 13-7, and they'll probably compensate or account for, excuse me, about 60 to 70% of the action on that offense. So they're just priced too cheaply for the amount of volume that they should be getting this week.
Yeah, with two of their big pass catchers out, most of the offense should go through them. Devin, what do you got?
So I have a couple cheap guys that I'm sure I'll get blasted on.
Perfect.
But I'll save those for now. What are we doing with? Here's the problem with wide receiver. There's as great of passing matchups as we mentioned. There's not a lot of great wide receivers that I love. Amari Cooper's probably one of my top guys, although he's going up against Josh Norman, and you can make the case for Michael Gallup in GPPs. But I can't do it in cash. For me, it's Keenan Allen ahead of Sammy Watkins in cash, simply because Watkins could pull a hamstring in the first quarter, which he has a tendency to do. And then the one situation I do like is the Arizona situation, even though I kind of poo-pooed on Kyler Murray as a play. But one of these, Larry Fitzgerald is probably going to just, at 4,600 on DraftKings, he's just too cheap, and he's almost guaranteed points in cash. And we mentioned that the Ravens have some corner issues. I think they're going to get the ball out quick. And Ryan, who's the slot corner that you said was missing?
Yeah, Tavon Young was hurt kind of late in the summer for the Ravens, injured his neck, is out for the year. He was supposed to be their top slot corner.
Okay. And then two cheap guys, like I had mentioned, Deion Kane for the Colts as a GPP play. He's the minimum price on DraftKings. He's going to replace who's the Carolina receiver?
Devin Funchess.
Devin Funchess.
Because he played for Michigan. You don't remember his name?
I tend to forget those players. And then Travis Benjamin, who's going to be sliding in for Mike Williams, deep threat speedster. He's 3,200 on DraftKings. And if you want to fade Keenan Allen, those targets have to go somewhere. So Eckler and Allen will get a majority of them, but I suspect that they will take a couple of deep shots just to open up space with open up space for Allen and Eckler. So I think they'll take a couple of deep shots to Travis Benjamin, but I think that cash is pretty straightforward this week.
There's a couple guys on my list that we haven't mentioned yet. Ryan, tell me about your boy, JuJu Smith-Schuster. Is he someone that you think is in for a bounce back week after last week?
You have now impacted my stacks section for later in the show.
Oh, spoiler!
But yes, I do. I mean, a lot of narrative around can JuJu be the number one receiver, and then a lot of angst around his 8 for 76 last week. Which, guys, that's not terrible.
Right.
Against a team who is famous for shutting down the top option on other teams. So that's not the worst result that JuJu could have had. Frankly, getting hurt at the end of the game was the worst result he could have had. But he did return to full practice today. Not worried about the injury, not worried about the bounce back. I think it's coming now.
Nice. John, what about Devontae Adams? He was on that opening night, Thursday night game, so we didn't get a chance to play him in the main slate last week. Is he someone who's on your radar?
Yeah, he's definitely on the radar. It's just, it's an interesting situation because, number one, that game on Thursday night was a snooze fest. I think we can all agree on that.
Yeah.
It was the one Thursday night game we get to watch in its entirety all year because we normally record this show during Thursday night football. And so I made it through the first quarter before I went to bed and woke up and saw the score. And it was, what a nightmare of a game that was. And then, the other part of it is, the second component is he's playing the Vikings, and the Vikings did a hell of a job last week shutting down Atlanta's pass game. And so, it is a little bit intimidating if you combine how good the Vikings looked and how bad the Packers looked. But, the thing is the ownership is going to be low because of recency bias. And so from that end, the game strategy move is to take the talented player in a situation where history has shown he can deliver. So for that reason, he's in. And I think that, my final take will obviously be in my article, but I'm almost sure I'll be overweight on him because I think his ownership will be too low.
So Steve has him at 13.6. Are you thinking it'll come in lower than that?
I bet it comes in lower than that. I bet it's in high single digits, and I'll probably be somewhere around 15 to 18%.
What are we doing about New England?
Do we think Antonio Brown plays any sort of large role, or they just like sort of ease him in this week, right?
I think he'll split time with Dorsett. Dorsett's the guy that's affected. Probably like a 50-50 split, which probably eliminates both of them from contention. So Edelman still gets his time. On the outside, Josh Gordon's going to be dealing with the only player on the Dolphins who's worth his salt, and that's Xavier Howard. So really it's Edelman, and then, you take your picks amongst those running backs. Typically what has happened in the past is when they build big leads, Sony Michel, he gets quite a bit of action, but I will at least defer to Devin's theory that if Damian Harris is active, that maybe that's affected, but I don't know. I think you do have to play a guessing game with those running backs because you really never know what Belichick's going to bring to the table.
I'll take some shots on Antonio Brown. It's a timing offense. They're gonna be able to do whatever they want. They're gonna treat this like a glorified practice, and they may want some game reps with Brady and Brown. It's a bit of a narrative, but I think that they try to make Brown happy by getting him involved because he wasn't involved in the preseason and he wasn't involved week 1. So I don't know what his
salary. Yeah, I'm just thinking his salary is going to be too high for the amounts. He would have to do so much with those targets that it becomes prohibitive in my opinion.
7,000 on DK.
Yeah, that's a bit much.
That's a bit much. Okay, let's move on. I thought we could get through a show without talking about Antonio Brown, but I guess we have to.
Yeah, the Steelers fan wants to move on.
It may be the only game he plays this year.
He's just everywhere at this point.
Yes. Let's talk about tight ends here.
Darren Waller and move on.
Click.
Yeah. He's high on the list here. We got Hunter Henry. He's out. We've already talked about that. Jordan Reed's got limited practice in on Wednesday and Thursday. Concussion stuff in Jordan Reed, I'm going to think that they sit him another week. He's just had so many concussions. And Vernon Davis had a decent game last week. Devin, you like Waller?
I think my list is really twofold. It's TJ Hawkinson and Darren Waller. We've mentioned a lot of names here that I want to spend up on. And, Hawkinson, I had concerns about a rookie tight end, just typically that they don't perform. But he looked every bit the part of a first-round pick, and we know that Matthew Stafford likes to go to his tight ends with the Eric Ebron history there. And at 3,000 on DraftKings is simply too cheap. I think that, and then the next name is Darren Waller. So Waller is the beneficiary of the pricing coming out before the last game on Monday is done. And they didn't really adjust his price based on last week. So he's only 3,300. What did he catch? 7 passes for 70 yards last week? Something like that?
Yeah, 100% of the snaps, 30% of the targets.
Yeah, 7 for 70. So at 3,300, he has 5x upside pretty easily without scoring a touchdown, which is pretty crazy for a tight end. I'll leave Kelsey for somebody else. But he's my top GPP guy and a great flex option as well if you want to play 2 tight ends.
Nice. Ryan, tell me about your tight ends.
Yeah, Devin said it starts with Waller. And at the risk of bringing up the same obvious guy I did last week, George Kittle's the wide receiver 1 in San Francisco, so you've got to sprinkle him in. Steve has him at 11.2. I don't know. John's more the MEE expert here, but I feel like that's pretty low. 10 targets. He had 2 touchdowns negated by penalty too. So he could have had just a massive week. What are you guys doing with Evan Engram? Because he's somebody I slept on last week and certainly lost that battle. So what are you thinking? I know Waller's the better priced guy, but Engram had a lot of volume too.
If you would have listened to my stack section last week, I told you Eli Manning and Evan Engram.
It's hard to listen to you though sometimes.
You lost me at Eli.
He threw for 310 yards.
He did.
I know, but every time you mention Eli Manning, like the whole YouTube comments thing just blows
And every
up.
time I mention him, he throws for 300 yards. But okay.
Yeah. John, who do you got at tight end? What's your answer to the Evan Engram question? Because it looks like Sterling Shepard may not play in this game.
Yeah, so I mean, Evan Engram is on my cash game list along with Darren Waller. We'll talk about Darren Waller in a second. But Engram, last week he saw all sorts of targets in that game. I'm trying to pull it up. Was it like four? What did you just say? What did he have? How many? He had 11 catches for 116 yards and a touchdown last week. And Ryan, you need to read tips and picks because he was called out as a cash game article and one of the top GPP picks in that article. So
14 targets.
I read it. I just didn't listen, so shame on me.
All right, that's fair. Darren Waller, right now, Steve does have him at what? What's he have him at? 18%.
18% ownership, yeah.
That's on Thursday night. Typically what happens is chalk gets chalkier as more content comes out throughout the course of the week. I will not be surprised on DraftKings to see Darren Waller approach 30% by Sunday morning. If he's 30% and you're playing multiple tournament lineups, you need to be below that. I know that the opportunity is there. There's a lot that's arguing in his favor, but it's still Darren Waller at the end of the day. And 30% crowd ownership, the right game strategy move there is to go under.
Or go 100%.
Or go 100%. That's actually, I don't know if you're being.
I'm being dead serious.
Yeah.
Do one or the
right
other.
move. I agree.
Yeah.
If you feel that strongly about him, then you need the only way to get an advantage over the field is to go 100% Darren Waller. And for me, that's not the right move because he's Darren Waller. I would much rather have George Kittle at 11%. Vernon Davis is a similar price point, and the Cowboys cannot defend tight ends. Just look at our game logs over the past year and a half. Vernon Davis, 3,200 on DraftKings, 6,300 on fantasy draft. And, what about Hawkinson? I mean, this dude looked legit.
Do not listen.
Devin mentioned
the two guys I mentioned, Darren Waller and TJ Hawkinson, and then John just repeats them. Yes.
Yeah, you know he doesn't listen to you, Devin. This should not come as a surprise.
The only people that listen to me are the comment section because
waiting to pounce on you.
This is how I don't get mad at you. I just don't listen, and then I don't have anything negative to say.
It's a great relationship strategy. All right, real quick, just kind of a strategy question here. Austin, you alluded to it earlier, having two Chargers in the lineup. So there's a potential that in our cash game lineups we talked about here that we have Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen for the Chargers, and that we have Tyrell Williams and Darren Waller for the Raiders. Are we a little too heavy on two teams, or are you guys fine because you know that those target funnels are so narrow?
They're cheap enough, and the target funnels are so narrow.
Thank you for bringing that up. That was a question that came out on Twitter this evening, and a few folks asked that, and I think that they're just too cheap. That's the short answer, and the volume should be there. So
I wouldn't go 3 Raiders if you like Josh Jacobs.
Agreed.
Yeah, and Josh Jacobs only caught one pass last week. This should be a pass heavy game, and if it gets to that, I wouldn't be surprised if they brought in what's his name?
Is it still Jalen Richard?
Jalen Richard, yeah. Jalen Richard might get some additional playing time this week if they fall behind early.
And when John's talking about game theory and GPPs and mentioning the ownership projections, he's talking about Steve Buzzard's sort of roster percentages that he projects what he thinks the players, how much they're going to be owned in GPPs. You can see those numbers on our site as separate articles, or there's a column in our lineup optimizer that shows you ownership percentage.
Would you guys consider going – sorry for interrupting.
Yeah, no, go for it.
Would you guys consider 2 tight ends
this
week?
No.
There are more than one there's more than one tight end that I like, but there's also a lot of wide receivers and running backs that I like. So I don't know that I would. There's
been enough evidence that, I don't know if we want to call them studies, but retrospective analyses of various tournaments to show that playing 2 tight ends, playing a tight end in your flex is a losing proposition over the long term. So as a rule, I try to avoid it unless there's something there that, if it's like Kelsey and Kittle, sure, you could do it there. But if you're trying to slide in Waller and Hawkinson, no, I wouldn't suggest it.
I just like Travis Kelce a lot and think that he's priced at 73, which 73 for the wide receivers is, Sammy Watkins. So you could theoretically take a shot on Kelce if you want to save money on Waller and go with both of them.
Yeah.
I wouldn't necessarily. I guess Hawkinson and Waller could work, but to your point, statistically over the long run, it's not going to.
Yeah.
Anything can happen in 1 week, but
Sure.
I'm not doing it either. I may do it in 1 or 2 lineups, but not frequently.
The tough thing with that Kelce is I would think he would outscore Sammy Watkins on a gross basis, but with positional scarcity, they're the same price. Are you going to have a $3,300 wide receiver along with that, or would you rather just Sammy Watkins / Keenan Allen and then Darren Waller? So I'd rather the latter, of course.
Yeah. Please give us a thumbs up. Thanks for watching this deep into the video. We've got defenses, stacks, and parting thoughts left on the agenda. Devin, who are you playing at defense this week?
Yeah, it's tough. So, I want to go New England because, like I mentioned, they're probably one of the best defenses that I've seen in, top to bottom in quite some time. Stephon Gilmore might be the best corner in football, and then their defensive line, and even without Kyle Van Noy, they looked tremendous last week. But 3,700, I don't know if I can go there in cash. I'm typically a guy who likes to spend all the way down, and there's not a lot of great options going all the way down. So I'm going to actually take the Cincinnati Bengals against Jimmy Garoppolo. I'm still not convinced that Garoppolo is what we think he is. I was on Tampa last week, and they had a pick six. And all the reports, once again, out of San Francisco were not positive on Garoppolo's offseason, and he didn't look particularly great in week 1 either. So at 2,600 on DraftKings, that's the route that I'm going.
Ryan, who you got defense?
For cash, Houston, they're sub 3,000. They're playing the aforementioned, oddly named Gardner Minshew II. So Houston's the cash pick. I'm not interested in Baltimore at 3,800. They do check the boxes for being a large home favorite, but I don't know why that line's 14. Arizona can still score and may not turn it over as much as we'd like if we're playing Baltimore. Going down to the bottom of the list, it is hard, like Devin said. I maybe it might be a little bit cute, but maybe in a GPP. Detroit, because of the injuries to the Chargers that we mentioned and Phillip Rivers being a statue back there. But he's just so accustomed to getting the ball out fast that I don't know how much pressure they're going to be able to get on him. So it's really tough at the bottom. I do like the Cincy call. That's not one that I had thought of, but it's definitely one that I'll entertain.
What about Denver?
Oh, Denver.
Vic Fangio going up against Mr.
Old
Trubisky.
team.
That whole game is defense, right? There's nothing in that game that you should like. The Bears have to be in play against Denver and Joe Flacco. I looked at that and I was trying to write down players I would target from, and the list is about this long, which typically means this defense is where you should be targeting there. That game should be a snooze fest, I would suspect. So yeah, those are both in play. Excuse me. From my end, you guys both called my cash game lineups or defenses. I think the Texans are the pick at 2,800, and the Patriots at 3,700. I'm okay with paying it if you have the room. In terms of GPPs, what about Devin? What about the Titans and what they did to your Browns last week? They looked impressive. Got a lot of pressure on Baker Mayfield. This week they go up against Jacoby Brissett at home. I don't know. I feel like that's a pretty good play, and I don't know. What do we have them in terms of ownership? We're looking at
1%.
I'm still scrolling, 1.4%. So for me, that's a pretty strong play for tournaments.
Yeah, the Browns were just a disaster week 1.
One more real quick, Austin.
Yep.
The Giants at 2,500, they're at home. We saw what the Jets did to Josh Allen last week. So Allen can still be good, but the Giants D can also be good.
They're the play on FanDuel at 35.
Right on.
They're by far the cheapest on FanDuel.
We've teased them a little bit earlier in the show. Let's talk about them some more. Let's talk about some stacks. John, I'll go to you first. Let's hear some stacks that you like this week.
All right, so I've given a couple of these through the show. That Arizona team stack with or without Mark Ingram, I'll stand behind that. Talked about Goff to Cup. I think that's one I like for reasons I talked about earlier. David Carr to Tyrell, I think, is pretty obvious. One that wasn't mentioned, I don't know. It'd be interesting. Maybe you could toss it to Ryan after this. But Dante Moncrief saw 10 targets last week. Didn't look great. He had 3 drops or thereabouts, but he had 10 targets, and I think that he's going to be under-owned. He's only $4,000, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, $4,000 on DraftKings, $7,400 on Fantasy Draft. And I think a lot of folks are going to be looking, in line with what Ryan was saying, they're going to be looking at JuJu to have this big game. And certainly he's got that potential. But Moncrief, I think, is somebody that could go overlooked in GPPs. And then the last thing, these aren't necessarily stacks that you can target, but just general discussions around winning strategies. Don't be afraid to do game stacks. And I talked a little bit about what I was talking with Arizona and Baltimore, but game stacks, that you don't have to get that fancy. You can just take a quarterback, a wide receiver, and then run it back with a wide receiver from the other team. And there are 2 games this week that I think look particularly attractive around that end. I think Seattle and Pittsburgh is something that, even though the under-over is only about 47, I think that one has some sneaky upside. And I'm going to be building some game stacks around players in that game. And then the other one that is more obvious is the Saints and Rams. We have 2 electric offenses there, and you can go any number of ways and just build outs and hope for a 30 to 35 score. And if that happens, I can promise you, you're going to be cashing.
Yeah. Ryan, you didn't like the Moncrief call. Tell us why not.
Yeah, apologies if everybody just heard me typing. I thought I was on mute, but I was typing Tyler Lockett to put into my couple of Steeler stacks here.
Yeah.
Roethlisberger, JuJu that we talked about earlier. But Moncrief was horrible. And I'm not sure the Steelers' offensive coaching staff is very smart at this point. But if they are, James Washington plays more this week. And the player with the 3rd most air yards in the entire NFL in week 1 was James Washington. He caught one of the deep passes he got. If he connects with 2 of them and is on the field more this week, some big things can happen. So it's you're not going to need to play too much of him, but he's a deep threat waiting to happen. He's a long touchdown waiting to happen. And Tyler Lockett played the majority of his snaps out of the slot. And watching the Steelers attempt to cover slot receivers for the last 2 years has made me lose hair. And it's just awful. They were one of the worst teams against slots last year. Keenan Allen had 13 catches or something in a game late in the year. And we saw what Julian Edelman did. Philip Dorsett had the long touchdown out of the slot. So they haven't fixed it, and I don't know that they will. So if that game does get high scoring, Seattle will have to open up a little bit, and I expect Lockett to get a few more targets than he did last week.
Devin, who are your stacks this week?
Eli? No, just kidding.
Eli Manning and Evan Engram. I totally expected you to lead with that.
No. Dak Prescott, Amari Cooper. Like I mentioned, Washington's secondary is pretty banged up. And then, do I go there? Why not?
Well, you will, because you know that the comments are going to flow. All the hate.
Yeah, Gardner Minshew and DJ Shark.
DJ Shark, DJ Shark,
And we got copyright.
DD Westbrook.
It could be DD too. I actually probably prefer DD. But Gardner Minshew actually, he threw 22 of 25 for 275 yards. And this Houston secondary, it's not great. They gave up 380, and it's to Drew Brees last week. That's all I'm going to say. I don't know his price, but he's probably ridiculously cheap.
A lot of that was out of the slot, which is where DD Westbrook plays.
Yeah. That's all true, but we haven't even finished recording this show, and the comments are already uploading on YouTube around Minshew as a recommendation.
He's 4,800. I'll take one shot on him. If he throws for 250 and 2 touchdowns at 4,800, why not?
And don't forget your weekly Josh Allen shot too, because
that's every week.
Might be another John Brown week too, though. In all seriousness, the Giants allowed a lot of deep passes last week.
That's every week. So every week I'm playing Josh Allen and John Brown, and it'll hit a couple times a year.
I had a few other stacks on my list. I'm curious if any of these interest you guys. Maybe these are sort of too popular ownership-wise that they're not really great GPP plays. Maybe let's do a quick Black Eye Joe round on some of the stuff. So for GPPs, do you think you'll have a decent amount of a Mahomes stack with, say, Watkins or Kelsey?
Kelsey for me.
Mecole Hardman is somebody I'll be looking at. He plays that Tyreek Hill role. He did get the most snaps of the wide receivers after Hill went out last week, and I think he's got a lot of big play potential. He's in the mold of Tyreek Hill. He's probably not the same, but he's pretty darn close, and he's going to be the guy that's going to be overlooked by the DFS community in tournaments.
Yeah. Brady Edelman, we kind of mentioned Edelman a little bit there. I think that's going to be a pretty popular one. Ryan doesn't care for that one. I think John nods his head. Yeah.
Brady Brown for me.
Brady Brown. I think I'm going to wait until
Killer Bees.
The Killer Bees. Nice.
The new roommates.
Yeah, roomies.
You know they're drawing up plays while they're cuddling in bed tonight.
Sure, yeah. Yeah, I needed that visual. Let's see. We already kind of mentioned Breeze and Thomas because you mentioned that high-scoring game that you liked there, John, and game stacks there. Rodgers and Adams at all? Kind of meh on those, it sounds like. And then we kind of already were like not too hot on the Houston duo, Watson-Hopkins.
I liked it until I saw Buzzard's projections. Hopkins, I think, is the third highest owned projected. 21%. He's going to go up against Jalen Ramsey. If anybody's matchup proof in the NFL at this point, it's DeAndre Hopkins. But I just feel like that's playing with fire at 21%. If he was about half that, I would be all over it. But that feels about right to me, and so I'm not crazy about it.
Yeah. All right, fellas, let's move on to parting thoughts. This is where you get to say, hey, there's one more player I want to mention, or give people advice sort of generally for week 2. Ryan, what is your parting thoughts for this week?
I knew you were going to come to me first because I didn't really have one written down. But
exactly.
No, I will say John hit on it earlier. But we talk players here. I mean, we have the Vegas section, but we mostly focus on players and matchups. You got to kind of step back, look at the 30,000 foot view, whatever they call it, and look at the games and find games you think are gonna hit. For instance, I looked at Arizona-Baltimore and was shocked at the 14-point spread. And I just don't think Arizona gets held to that low of a team total. It may not click this week for Arizona, but when it does, they're just going to have some huge games. The stats are suggesting it. So if you have an inkling or a notion, whatever you may want to call it like that, then act on it, especially in GPP for an amount you're comfortable with. I mean, put a couple lineups in with that game and stack it up. And if it works, and it's a game that you're going against the grain, it should work out for you pretty well. So look at the games, not just the players, when you're putting together your lineups.
Good point. Devin, parting thought?
No, I'm actually changing that to Chris Conley. So sorry for everyone who wants to sing Baby Shark.
Oh, I wanted to sing.
Sad Panda.
Yeah.
That's
John,
all I have.
That's fine. John, what's your parting thought?
Player I didn't mention earlier in GPP consideration for running back, Derrick Henry had looked really strong last week against the Browns. I think the Browns have a better defense than what we saw last week. He actually lined up, ran about a dozen routes or thereabouts, which is pretty high for him considering you've got Deion Lewis in the backdrop there, and he finished with a pretty darn a nice stat line. He had 20 touches for 160 yards and a pair of touchdowns. And he's going up against a Colts team as a decent home favorite. And that Colts team, oh, by the way, they looked really bad against Austin Eckler. And if they can't stop Austin Eckler, I'm not really sure they're going to be able to do much against Derrick Henry. And I think that he's very fairly priced at $6,000, 11.3 over there at Fantasy Draft. And I'm just looking in real time for his projected ownership. I'm still scrolling, so it's pretty low.
I don't entirely disagree with you there, but could you just randomly, could you pick two different players to compare, Austin Eckler and Derrick Henry?
But that's the point, right? I mean, Austin Eckler is like this skinny little guy, and they couldn't get him.
I mean, he did a lot of his work through the air, and Derrick Henry is not that kind of guy. But I don't disagree entirely. I was just making an observation.
All right. So he's 5.7%. While you were busting chops, at least I did get to figure out his
just killing time for you, man.
Implied ownership. I appreciate it.
He's got your back. You could stack him with that Titans defense and do a stack there.
Yep.
All right. That's what we've got for our show. Thank you for watching and listening, everyone. Be sure to check out all of our content over at footballguys.com. If you haven't subscribed with us, we have an in-season discount going on right now. If you go to our website and click the Join Now button in the upper hand right corner, you'll see kind of slightly lower prices for in-season deals. Go check that out if you're interested in a subscription. We'll be back next Friday morning with our Week 3 episode. On behalf of John Lee, Devin Knotts, and Ryan Hester, I'm Austin Lee saying thank you for watching and thanks for being a football guy. To check out our content at footballguys.com, click the button on Devin's face. To subscribe to our YouTube channel, be sure to click on the button on John's face. And if you'd like to see our latest video, click on the giant video in front of Ryan's face. Click any of those now. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening.